Hi everyone, welcome to Joe Glass Comics. I'm Joe Glass, the writer and creator of The Pride, as well as Acceptable Losses, The Miracles, Glitter Vipers, and so many more stories yet to come. I'm here this week to talk about the continued journey breaking into comics and the next step of that, which would be going to Comic Cons. A couple of caveats with that as usual. Obviously my path is that of a comic book writer, so this is probably more useful to writers than it is anyone else. But like I say, hopefully there's hints and tips for anyone who wants to do any part of comics creation to really find useful. Apologies for any interruption on sound caused by either this fan or my desk fan, but it's mega hot today. I really need it all right now. Like seriously, I need all the air, all the AC. Just send it to me, cool me down. I'm a hairy berry but do not do well with the sunlights. I need it, it's friggin' boiling. Another caveat I should add with this one, although this is going to be talking about Comic Cons and going to our first con in our personal journey and making comics on Wednesday Hour, I mean of course myself, PJ Montgomery, Drew Davis, Gavin Mitchell, people who were very much all tied up together in our first forays into trying to get into comics. The other caveat I should add is that technically there is another thing which we did maybe just a smidge before we did our first Comic Con. And when I say smidge, like maybe just a couple months before, possibly even might have been at the first Comic Con. It was a long time ago, and the way my brain deals with memory, it just kind of starts blending together. But that kind of stuff ties in more with networking, which for me and how I've been kind of planning this is really a future video, possibly even the next video. So like I say, what was really the next step is probably actually going to be in the next video. I wanted to talk in this one, however, about Comic Cons and going to your first Comic Con. So you've made the decision to become a comic book creator, you've made your first comic book, whether it be a little zine or a small preview 12-page ashcan, or whether it be something more sort of substantial. Perhaps you've even gone out and made your first graphic novel as your very first foray into making comics, which bravo, but it happens, So yeah, you've got something basically. You're now ready for the world to see it, and you need to know how to make that happen. Something I probably should have mentioned actually in the Making Comics book, which just came up on as I'm saying it. Yes, when you are making comic books, remember you are looking at multiples of 4 when you are taking pages to print. So yeah, if you're making a comic book, it's generally 20 pages, 24 pages, 28, 32, that kind of thing. It's a multiple of 4, and it's to do with the printing process. So don't go out there thinking, oh hey, I'm going to make a 9-page comic and just take it to a printer, because the printer's going to be like, right, where's the rest of it? Anyway, that should have really been in a previous video, so we're going to go straight on to the Comic Con. So how exactly do you get into a Comic Con? It's different depending on the Comic Con you're going to. Various Comic Cons have their own different sort of rules and their own different sort of way of choosing who's going to be able to attend and what kind of things they want at the event, etc. And a lot more and more I find these days are sort of doing that themselves instead of picking and choosing, so they're letting everyone apply, but then they're actually taking all those applicants and sort of cutting it down to the people they want to have there, because they have how they want to fit. And it's an element of trying to make it fair, to perhaps do these guys have been here a few times, so we should maybe give someone else a spot. It doesn't necessarily always work out, because obviously you'll get people going there repeatedly, which doesn't really give access to new creators, but it is what it is. That's how it goes with getting into Comic Cons. Your first step obviously is to make sure that you've got stuff to take. You should really make sure that you have some way of sharing it digitally. A lot of Comic Cons will request when you apply that you send them a link to your work. So whether that be an online store, or you could create a social media presence of some kind, whether that be a Facebook page or a Twitter handle specifically for your comics or your publishing group, or even just you as a creator. But something where basically people are going to be able to have a look at what it is that you're trying to sell. Similarly, this could be things like a Dropbox folder where you will put a digital copy of the book, meaning that the people organizing the convention exhibition could perhaps read the book and see does this fit with the kind of exhibition that we're putting on. But that's going ahead a little bit, that's just sort of getting yourself prepared for what's going to happen. So the first step, but you maybe are thinking like, is how exactly do I get a table at a Comic-Con? As I say, every Comic-Con is going to have its own rules and its own regulations. The first step for you, however, as someone who wants to take part, is to head to their website. Nearly every Comic-Con nowadays is going to have a website of some kind, and on there will usually be a page dedicated to people wanting to exhibit at the show, where people can apply or even just enter their email address to get information or be put onto a mailing list so that they will receive an email when applications are open for applying for the Comic-Con. This, like I say, is the case with almost every Comic-Con here in the UK, and most Comic-Cons in the US as well, I believe. So yeah, anywhere you are going to be wanting to exhibit, it's probably going to be a good idea to check out their website and see exactly on their page what it is they're looking for and how exactly you apply. As a general rule, it is a simple matter of filling in a form, which, like I say, will contain basic information on you, where you're from, who have you published with, if you've published with anyone, or if you're self-published, links to your work so that they can perhaps see and learn a bit more about you and your stuff as a creator, and sort of see if that's going to fit. And yeah, that's kind of basically it. You basically apply, and then that's it. You will hear back usually within a month or two about whether you've got a table. You then have to pay, and yeah, that's kind of it. Now, that's obviously where things get a little bit more difficult for some people, as I mentioned, paying. So yeah, Comic-Cons and exhibiting at Comic-Cons are potentially an expensive business. For your first shows, you're probably going to put some money up front. As such, what I would recommend is for your very first shows as a brand new little baby creator, don't be going to try and do New York Comic Con. Don't go and try and do San Diego Comic Con. Definitely not San Diego Comic Con. That is an expensive show. You will want to go and check out your local shows, like see if there's any in your local area. You'll be surprised how many Comic Cons there are, particularly nowadays. There seem to be more and more little weekend shows which are like based in a hotel lobby or something like that, and it's like there's only going to be so many tables, but if you can get in, then yeah, there's an opportunity to start your work. That is basically how we started. Me and the boys used to regularly go to Comic Cons like Bristol Comic Expo and Thought Bubble. Like, we were at some of the first Thought Bubbles. We didn't apply for Thought Bubble right away. We stuck with staying local. So our first Comic Con was actually the Cardiff Independent Comic Expo, or CICE, which sadly is no longer existing. But yeah, it was basically based in Cardiff, which was where we all lived at that time. So it meant straight away we had no accommodation costs to worry about, no travel costs to worry about. We were literally just paying for the table and obviously on the stock. So, and then obviously just getting the stock there. So generally our expenses to outlay for doing the Comic Con were minimal. That is ideal for a new comic book creator. So yeah, if you're brand new and you are wanting to do your very first Comic Con, check out your local shows. That will also help you build a nice local audience, which is a lot easier to cultivate than an international audience per se. So yeah, obviously with social media these days, that's a little bit different. You can actually cultivate an international audience fairly easy, but yeah, a local audience is a little bit easier to cultivate because you can be there at the local shows and you can sell your stuff to people who will then see you around. So yeah, it's handy to do. So do your local shows first. I would recommend sticking with small local shows for a little while, do a few of them, and gradually radiate and expand out. So like we started with Cardiff, we then sort of wound up going to Bristol as well, which is just over the bridge. And then, you know, we just sort of built up and up. And then when we got to a certain point, we then did Thought Bubble, which is obviously one of the biggest shows here in the UK, particularly for independent and small press self-published creators. Thought Bubble is a great show because it's very much more about the art of making comics, as opposed to the sell and merchandising possibilities of a big show like, say, the Showmasters run shows, like Cardiff Film and Comic Con, London Film and Comic Con, things like that. We did do those shows at first, but those shows became very much focused on, you know, merchandise sales and the big celebrities that you can get to sign books or sign photos or headshots and whatever. So it ultimately became a show which was less focused on the actual comics. They do still have an artist alley. I do understand actually in the recent years they have been improving that aspect, and that's good because it was definitely needing improvement when we started out. But yeah, it ultimately became a show that wasn't ideal for us, and that's something you're going to learn. The more shows you do, you will figure out which shows are good for you and which shows are bad. Don't feel the need to do every single show. you should always be keeping a record of what shows are doing well, which shows are doing bad, and stick with just doing shows which do well for you. At the end of the day, the more time you are spending at Comic Cons is less time you are spending making comics. So ultimately, Comic Cons aren't the be all and end all. They are, however, absolutely where you're going to make the majority of your money as creators and as people with a self-published comic, which you can then funnel into making more. So yes, you should absolutely treat them very seriously and have fun when there as well, but still treat it as this is your business and you should be treating it as such. And as any good business, you should be knowing which things are working out for your business and helping you and which things are not helping you at all. For us, as I say, we started off with CICE, or Cardiff Independent Comic Expo, which became our very first show. We managed to get a table fairly cheap. We came down, we set up, we were like wicked excited because it was our first time not being fans at a Comic Con and wandering the halls. We were going to sit behind a table and sell people our book. We did initially a flip book. It was a 12-page preview, I want to say, of Stiffs issue 1, and you flipped it over and it had a short self-contained story for the Pride, which involved Fabman. That was the short story It Gets Better, which wound up being collected in the Pride Adventures issue 1. So yeah, it kind of all sort of tied together, but that was our very first foray. So like I said, the very first thing we did wasn't even a proper comic as such. It was a preview book. It was an ashcan, essentially. An ashcan which we sold because, like I say, you know, it was not small, it wasn't printed on a zine. We spent money to make that. So like I say, it cost us. So yeah, we wanted to make some of that back. And it was kind of like a good preview to sort of start setting us off and start creating an audience. So yeah, that's kind of what we had. And if I remember, that is all we had on the table. We didn't have any other books. We had just that. I do think actually, you know, come to think of it, we made a bit of a mistake and we actually made Stiffs t-shirts as well. I think that might have even been at our very first show. And that was a mistake. We jumped into merchandising, which, yeah, don't do that. Don't do that when it's your very first comic book. There is certain kind of elements of merchandising which you can, maybe should consider, but like don't go into thinking like you're going to sell t-shirts. Like no one is necessarily going to buy a t-shirt for your comic book when you are a relatively unknown and particularly brand new creator. And that is a big expensive item. So yeah, be careful what you consider also spending into. The main things you want to do about first Comic Con is make sure that your books are out there, that they are presentable, they look nice, you know, they are easy to see and clear. They have plenty of copies so people can pick up and look through them, particularly if you have a couple of people at the table. You want to make sure that you have help. Doing a Comic Con by yourself is possible, but it's very difficult, particularly at a very busy show. Anyway, where you're going to have a busy spell. However, you could find yourself struggling to pay attention to everyone. So see if you can bring someone along, whether that be a fellow creator on the book, or whether it be just a family member or something like that. I've actually done a few Comic Cons where my mum or my dad helped me out. So, you know, you just need to find the help where you can get it. You should also make sure that you have something to keep track of money and look after money. And also, obviously, you need to really be presentable yourself. You want to be coming across as approachable. That means, you know, try not to spend all day slouching behind the table or timidly hiding behind it. It's a tough one because generally people in comics are anxious people. Like, I come across as gregarious and outgoing, but that is something which takes me energy to do. Like, even these videos take energy for me. So yeah, to do a Comic Con, I always come across as the same, like really bouncy, really high energy and stuff. And like I am, but that is also something which I am going to be exhausted by the end of the day. So that is something you should really consider doing. Find your comfort zone, because you don't want to be uncomfortable the whole time you're at the show, but at the same time, you want to be able to be approachable. You don't want people to feel like they can't talk to you. And like if you're too insular, then that's going to be one thing to put off. Likewise, you don't want to be too far the opposite way. There are some particular sellers here in the UK who are super pushy, and it puts a lot of people off. So yeah, I would say like be careful how you come across. You want to be that nice, approachable, friendly level. So next up, I'm going to be talking about like what you should bring to your Comic Con. Now, obviously the main thing is the pretty much obvious is, you know, your product. You want to bring your books. So like you are going to want copies to have on your table, to just like have lying around. You want a couple of copies, which maybe a display copy, which people can flick through. Particularly, I would say if you've got like a big old book like this, a display copy, a copy or 2 copies, which you will happily put on the table and be like, yeah, everyone thumb through as much as you like, treat it like crap. And that's fine. You can add that into losses on your table or in your general taxes. So yeah, it's something you should really be open to the idea that it's going to happen, because people are going to want to flip through your stuff. If you've got like lots of little comic books, then you don't necessarily need display copies. You can treat them more like that, but you do want to make sure that everyone is treating them well when they're on the table. Seems obvious, but that's kind of it. That's one of the big things. Another little thing which I would recommend, even for a first-time Comic-Con person, these days everything should have a website. So you should have some kind of online presence, either as a creator or for your product. So like I say, whether that be social media, a Facebook page, Twitter account, Instagram account, anything at all. And that means something else you should have on your table are business cards. Business cards should be relatively simple, maybe have an eye-catching design, and definitely contain information on the back on how they can find you online and how they can buy your work online. Now, this is super important because 9 times, maybe not that bad, let's say 7 out of 10 people who go past your table aren't going to stop, or they are going to stop, but they're not going to buy anything. They'll just look for like a free leaflet or business card with information where they can purchase it at home or later. Plenty will come back and will actually purchase at the table. So don't, you know, I'm not trying to put scaremonger at all, but a lot of purchases will actually happen after the con. So you want something which makes that easier for them. I would recommend getting something like this. It's a portable battery with various sort of USB slots for charging your various electronic goods. One of the next items I'm going to talk about is going to be one of those all-important electronic goods which you really should look into investing in. Maybe not necessarily for your very first Comic-Con, but certainly if it becomes something you're going to do again and again, you're going to need one in the long run. Next up is some kind of card reader. The number of times you'll be at a Comic-Con and people are like, "Do you take card?" It's going to become the bugbear question of any new Comic-Con goer, exhibitor, seller, person. So yeah, invest early on in a card reader. I've got a PayPal here because I have a PayPal account. Yeah, it's pretty good. Like PayPal here is pretty good. I've heard that the Square in the US in particular, which have like a little Square dongle you can plug in the bottom of your phone. That's really good apparently. There's one doing around here in the UK called Summit, which I'm pretty certain is in the US as well. So yeah, there's all kinds of various different ones nowadays. Highly recommend them. Like I say, so many people aren't going to be carrying cash or run out of cash. I would say perhaps right now in particular, it's probably going to be an extra good idea. A lot more people are more reticent with carrying like cash money these days and are more easily accepting paying with card because of, you know, obviously contact and the ability that has to spread certain things. So yeah, I would say invest in one of them. That brings me neatly on to another element, which I always used to poo-poo at Comic Cons, and now I really feel like an idiot. I should have been doing this for absolutely years, and will definitely be continuing in future. Get yourself some hand sanitizer. Have it on your table, behind you. I'm not saying like on your table for like customers to have per se. I'm like for yourself, behind your stock, or like where you're keeping like your books, wherever. Keep a hand sanitizer. There's so many people who are going to want to shake your hands, so many people who are going to be handling money with you. You're going to want to use this a lot. Be prepared to possibly bring a second bottle, because like say if it's a long Comic-Con of 2 or 3 or 4 days, you're probably going to go through more than one bottle. These days, obviously, that is not just an extra thing to have, it's kind of a necessity. So yeah, definitely get hand sanitizer. I always used to laugh at people who, well, I didn't laugh at people, that's going a bit far. I always used to just think it was a bit ridiculous. I was always just kind of one of those like, yeah, what's the worst that can happen? Pandemic. Yeah, generally, nearly everyone who's ever been to a Comic-Con is probably aware of the terms con-flu or con-crud. And yeah, you were around a lot of people in a locked room, sometimes a very locked hot room. And yeah, a lot of people bring all kinds of colds and sneezes. So yeah, hand sanitizer is actually a great idea. Nowadays, to add to that, you probably going to need a mask. Now, if you're like me and you wear glasses, I highly recommend getting a mask which has something like this on the top, which is like an extra filter, which makes it sort of stick to skin around your nose, which then means that your glasses don't fog up. However, something which a few friends of mine have got, which I'm looking into getting for the future, because now doing Comic Cons, at least for the next year, I'm gonna have to wear a mask. I'm looking into see-through masks because obviously you should be as accessible as possible. Some people are hard of hearing, some people are completely deaf, and as such rely on lip reading, and obviously masks aren't helpful for that. So yeah, if you are going to be going to a Comic-Con in the near future and are required to wear a mask, you should really consider getting maybe a see-through mask. There are actually a few out there, plastic shields, visors, various different ones. So yeah, maybe look into something like that as well. You're going to want something like this. This is a sort of accounting book, which I picked them up in WH Smith's. You can probably get them much cheaper elsewhere, but like Smith's is easy for me. It was opposite my day job. So, and in here, like I fill a rough tally of like what sales I've had at a Comic Con. This not only helps you keep track of, you know, what books are selling well, what items are selling well at a Comic Con, what cons are doing well if you wind up doing multiple shows. It's also going to be handy when it comes time to do your taxes. You will probably have to start doing taxes eventually, probably pretty soon, if you start making comics and start making a lot of money at Comic Cons. So yeah, consider getting one of these pretty early on to keep track of your sales. Sharpies are another absolute necessity. Nearly every Comic-Con, people will ask you to sign their book. Now, you might not be expecting this right away because you might be thinking like, hey, I'm just a new person myself. I'm just a comic book fan making my first comic book. No one's going to want me to sign it. Yes, they absolutely will. A lot of Comic-Con goers and attendees are kind of looking for the next big thing, the next big creator, and part of that means like they want to get it signed because it might be worth money down the line, because there's still that sort of mindset in the comics fandom. So yeah, bring plenty of Sharpies. There's a good chance you are going to be asked to sign something. Similarly, a pencil case filled with all kinds of pens would be handy. Maybe bring a multitude of Sharpies. Like if you've got a book which has black pages or a black cover, then like metallic Sharpies are really good for sticking out on those kind of things. Similarly, you're going to want a couple of pens to write in your sales in your book, and also maybe make notes. Like you could have quiet spells, so like bring yourself a notebook and, you know, do notes, hash out your next pitch, that kind of thing. Now for me, and what I personally do at Comic Cons, now me and the boys didn't do this necessarily so much when we did our first shows, but we did, or rather I do this very much now. And anyone who's seen me at Comic Cons, particularly in the last like 5 years, knows this well with me. And is a good chance that I'm probably getting myself as a bit of a reputation of the Elton John of comics. So for me, my next sort of big hint on doing your Comic Con is make yourself very visible by making yourself stand out. Now that's not to say like go and dress like a clown or do something which is completely out of character for you or completely out of your comfort zone just so that you're visible. But believe me when I say that just standing there in jeans and a comic book t-shirt is not going to make you stand out. So many people will be wearing the same thing and it's almost like a uniform, and that's not just like the exhibitors, that's also like the fans and attendees of the show. So if you want to sort of like stand out and maybe get people attracted to the table, consider like things about how you present yourself that you might do. Like if you're a comic book creator who wears dresses, wear a nice dress, like as if you were going out. I'm not saying like put a bridal dress on, but I'm like, you know, wear something nice. I tend to wear nice t-shirts or shirts, like something which is a bit flouncy. You tend to wear almost like blousey material, like very thin materials, because like Comic Cons in the summer can get very warm, so that's quite handy as well for someone like me who overheats. For me as well, I tend to wear a lot of glitter. I like wearing glitter. I like wearing eyeshadow. I like wearing makeup. I like wearing things which make me stand out. So you will have seen photos of me at Comic Cons probably where I'm wearing like a rainbow Muppet skin bolero, or where I'm like covered in makeup and glitter everywhere. But that's just me, and it means that for the fans of my books and the kind of things which I do, it means that not only do I stick out, but I'm kind of really easy and obvious to find, particularly for people who maybe never heard of me before but are looking for that kind of thing. Like that extends as well beyond me and to my table. An item which I highly recommend getting is a tablecloth. You want a tablecloth because every Comic-Con you go to will have tables, but they might not necessarily provide the tablecloths themselves. As a general rule, most places the tables are going to be about 6 foot by 2 foot, so get yourself a nice size tablecloth like that. Generally, white or black is a nice, safe way to go, but you might want to consider a block color if you have a particular color scheme to you or your work or something like that, which might help you stand out, because most people are going to have white or black tablecloths. Similarly, you might want to consider a pattern, but I would say that you want to be careful with a pattern. If you've got very small items on your table and the pattern on your tablecloth is very busy, then they could blend in, or they could start making the table looking really busy. So you might want to avoid patterns and stick with a block color, whether it be white, black, or a natural color. For me, a big part of what I do, of course, is make LGBTQ accessible and inclusive comic books. As such, I tend to include a lot of rainbow flags. So for me, something like this is kind of a necessity. And I have various ones. I have ones which I can drape across my table, on top of my tablecloths. I have ones which go in front of the table. I even used to have some which I used to put on top of banners behind my table. This was really great and useful for me because it meant that people who were LGBTQ fans and wanted that kind of content could tell from like across the room that like, oh, there's maybe something for me by this. So like, consider that. What kind of fans are you trying to attract, and how can you maybe communicate over a vast distance that, you know, this is going to be at your table? Another thing which helps with that, which I don't have an example of here, but is still at home, they're not in my new place sadly, would be banners. You can get roll-up banners pretty much anywhere these days. They are not inexpensive, but they're not too expensive either. You know, they're pretty easy to get the art put together, particularly if you have an artist working with you who, you know, is good with that graphic design stuff. They can normally sort of slap something together for you. It doesn't have to be super smart, it doesn't have to be super gorgeous. What it really needs to do is just be large enough and clear enough that from a distance it has you or your product's name on there, maybe a few links, and a big portion of art generally, just so then people from afar can see like, oh, there's that thing. So if someone is coming to a con and they're looking for you, which again, you know, it's probably not going to happen at your first Comic-Con, so you might not need it so much for your first one, but like, you definitely want to consider it after a first few, because like I say, it means that if they're looking for you, they will be able to see you from a distance, be like, that's where they are, and I can make a beeline for that table. I'd recommend getting a good water bottle. You are going to be thirsty a lot of the time for the day. If you don't bring your own water, you're going to wind up having to buy some all through the day, and that expense is going to build up fast, particularly if you can't get out of your convention venue. You'll find that many convention centers will sell water, but will be at a premium price. So if you would like to try and minimize your costs and save as much of the money you're making, then yes, maybe bring some in with you. Some conventions may not be happy with that, may not allow you to bring in water from outside, but they might allow you to bring a water bottle. So check the convention venue's rules and what you can do, but yeah, generally I would recommend a good water bottle, and perhaps food as well. Now, another element which for me I highly recommend is you want to create a three-dimensional sense on your table. Now, Joe, you might be saying, tables are three-dimensional. We do, after all, live in a three-dimensional universe. Well, yes, maybe we do, but what you will definitely want is to create more of a sense of a three-dimensional landscape on your table. If everything is just laid down flat on your table, then your table doesn't jump out. It's just a lot of flat stuff. Someone's going to essentially walk over to your table and look down at it to see your product. What I highly recommend investing in is a few things like these, like the basic like book stands. These are all starting to get a bit knackered and worn because I've been using these for maybe about 8-7 years. So yeah, get something like these. You can prop up books on them, a couple of sample. If you've got multiple titles, then it means that you can have a couple up, and it sort of immediately advertises to people walking past on the opposite end of the room even, that, oh, there's actually a couple different things there and I should maybe spend some time there. Similarly, you can add other elements to incorporate that idea of three-dimensionality to your table. So like something which I always have is things like whiteboards which light up, which I can put prices on. The fact they light up also helps attract people to your table, because you're creating this other element on the table which obviously adds a bit more flashiness, if you will, to everything you've got going on. So yeah, I highly recommend sort of investing in some things like that. It's a great way actually for advertising your prices. Some people might be a bit shy to actually ask you how much things are. So if you have some kind of whiteboard, or a whiteboard, light up whiteboard, or even see sometimes people with like, I don't know what you call them, I guess like cinema standees, where like old cinemas used to like put the film times and things. Or even that, we've seen people just use a chalkboard, you know, things like that. It's just something you can stand up, you can put your prices down, so anyone who's maybe a bit shy to ask can just like, all right, you can add it up and then decide what they're going to purchase. If you are going the whiteboard route though, be sure to make sure included in your pens are dry white markers, because you might want to change things, you might want to write little messages on. So yeah, you're going to want to get a nice variety of dry white markers to make something look interesting. And that's about it. That's kind of like the main big things, and then some, for what I think that you should really take to your Comic-Con, particularly your first Comic-Cons. Now, some of these items, as I say, don't necessarily have to be there with you at your very first show, but they're probably going to be things you want to invest in pretty early on, or maybe after a little while of doing shows once you decided that this is for you. Obviously, these investments can be included as part of your business, their business costs. So if you are immediately going into covering your taxes as a self-employed person, self-employed business, then yeah, you should really consider keeping all records of any kind of purchases like that, because obviously that's going to be handy for you down the line when doing your tax return. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of how to get into a Comic-Con, like how to apply for a Comic-Con, and kind of the basics of what you should consider taking to a Comic-Con, and a little bit about like how you should present yourself at a Comic-Con, like I say, mainly friendly, welcoming, and of course open to talk to anyone. There are all kinds of hints and tips which you'll get off various other creators as well, so obviously feel free, if you are someone who is looking to start going to Comic-Cons as an exhibitor, to maybe ask like what they recommend, like what they think you should do if you're going to exhibit at a show. You will get all kinds of handy hints and tips, because generally we're all a bunch of people who'd love to see new people at the shows and sort of get to meet new people, because yeah, we're all nice like that in the comics community, really. So yeah, come check us out. But yeah, that's about it for this particular step on the journey of breaking into comics. Next time, I haven't decided what the next video is going to be about as yet. It probably will be networking, but it might be something else if a different idea sort of takes my fancy, because we're kind of at that point where a bunch of different things were kind of happening at once in that journey which me and the boys took into breaking into comic books. So yeah, stick around. Please like this video if you found it useful. Please leave a comment on what is the next piece of information that you'd love to hear on how to break into comic books, and what kind of part of my journey you want to find out about. And yeah, I'll see you very soon to help spread some information and hopefully some interest and excitement to start taking part in this whole comics community industry thing that we do, and join me for more breaking into comics.